Hello, and welcome to or welcome back to How to Change the World, the podcast that equips change makers with the lessons, tools, and inspiration to drive meaningful impact in your community. I am Catherine Alonso, and this is a very special episode because it is our second annual book club review episode, and I am joined by the two one and onlys, Maggie Bauer and Eric DeMarco, who are two faithful members of the How to Change the World book club. And we meet in person in Phoenix, but also you can join virtually once a month. And we talk about all different kinds of books that are really around about how you create meaningful impact in the world. We read history, we read economics, we read business, we read psychology, really a whole range. But it's always a fantastic discussion. And so I wanted to invite them onto the podcast for the second time annually to talk about what we read this year, what we loved this year, and what we learned this year. Maggie, welcome. What was one of the things you took away from your reading about how to change the world this year?
I think one of the biggest things was this year we had a lot more perspectives than we normally do. Like typically we'll do sort of like a memoir and then an economics book and then maybe a social change book. And I feel like this year we got authors from much larger different areas. So I really appreciate it because we read everything from basketball stars to environmental scientists. So I really enjoyed that this year.
Yeah, I really love that too. It was a super big range. And Eric, welcome. How about you?
Going again with the perspective, I like the fact that we had, I think it was like a 50-50 split of like systemic change books, things that are like high level, like climate change. But we also had like a bunch of memoirs and how like individuals are helping the world and how we could help as well.
Yeah. Well, I am very excited to have you both back. So thank you so much for joining. And we are going to follow the same format that we did last year, which is we're going to give out awards from the books that we read. If, for you who are listening, you would like to reference all of the books that we read, there were 12 of them, obviously, once a month, and they are all listed in the podcast description. And they're also always listed on my website, catherinealonso.com. So let's start off with the first category here, which is most likely to change how you see the world. So here we're looking for a book that fundamentally shifted your perspective, whether it's on people, systems, or even what's possible in the world. Eric, let's start with you. What was your most likely to change how you see the world book this year?
I would have to go with, since my profession is in machine learning and AI, I like the fact that we read Unmasking AI by Joy Balawami. I'm not sure how to pronounce her last name. She, I think, is the head of the Algorithmic Justice League, which is also cool if you're into comics as well. She's stealing a little bit of that. But she gave as a memoir / look into how AI is changing our world. She talks about a project she did in grad school that couldn't capture her face using computer vision. And then she goes on and talks more about how the industry is unfolding and how that affects all kinds of people. It was a year or two old, so some of the newer things weren't in there, but it was a good foundation if you want to get into how AI is changing life today.
That's a good one. I had Unmasking AI as well in this category. For me, I use AI on a daily basis, whether it's an LLM or a driverless car, or even things like facial recognition technology to unlock my phone or whatever it might be. And a lot of it I do unconsciously. And this book really kind of gives a deep dive into the biases around facial recognition technology specifically, and really kind of forced into the forefront some things that I think I can quite easily ignore or overlook on a day-to-day basis, and really did make me realize, oh, I really have to educate myself more deeply on AI, how it's functioning, and what the shortcomings are of it in our everyday use. Maggie, how about you?
I'm going to go 3 for 3. I also had Unmasking AI for this, which I want to add to sort of the comments you guys have made. I also work in tech. We've started to put use AI a little bit more, and also in our products as well. And one of the things that really stuck with me was she talks about how there might be small biases in individual components, but as we build on those and we expand it more, those biases can just be magnified in a way that you just don't expect. So you really need to start addressing it while stuff is small. I actually liked the book so much it ended up being my work book club book as well for quarter 4. So yeah, really enjoyed it. Really enjoys the focus that she takes and sort of highlights different areas of focus that we can take a look at. And I also thought it was really approachable because sometimes books about AI and machine learning are very dry and academic. Like this, I feel like I could give to a family member who doesn't work in tech or have like an advanced degree, and they would be able to read it very easily.
Yeah, I agree. I loved this book is very much a memoir, and I don't know about you guys, but I wasn't expecting that when I picked it up, and it really puts this is a bit little on the nose, but it really does put a human face on the technology that we're talking about. And sometimes I think books about systems, technologies can get quite clinical, and this is such a deeply human account of something that is, a big part of our everyday world now.
I enjoyed that aspect as well. Someone who reads a lot of technology books, leaves humans out of the loop. Human in the loop is a big term in the community. So I'm glad we have people like Dr. Joy helping us keep us centered on what we should be thinking about people.
Totally. Yeah, I don't think we've ever gone 3 for 3 on a category. While the three of us meet up every month and talk about books, and I think enjoy that a lot, I'm not sure that we rarely are on the same page about a book, and so this might be the unique book that unites us. Okay, let's go to our second category. The one you couldn't stop talking about. So not necessarily a favorite book that we read, but just the one that hijacked your conversations for weeks on end. Maggie, you want to take this one first?
Yes, so mine was What the Wild Seas Can Be. This is a book we read a little bit earlier in the year, and the author, Helen Scales, she really she spent like 20 years doing research with the ocean and waters, and she sort of reflects on that time and what she thinks the past of the ocean has been and what the future looks like. We've read a couple of books that touch on climate change. I was going into this with a lot of anxiety and pessimism, and the author really addresses that. She's like, I don't know if you're going to be an optimist or a pessimist by the end of this book, but I just want to share what I have seen and witnessed. So I really enjoyed that. It's a very, very deep dive. And there's lots of pictures of fish in it, which I think is very fun. I enjoyed the fish pictures.
Maggie, by the end of the book, were you more or less pessimistic than you were going in?
I would say rather looking at it as like optimism, pessimism. I think of it as I felt more hopeful. Yes, things are very dire in a lot of ecosystems when we're looking at ocean ecosystems, but the sea is very adaptive. The animals that live there are very adaptive, plant life as well. So I felt more hopeful, and obviously we do want to do some of the things that we can to help protect those areas, but I felt a tiny bit less doom and gloom by the end of it, which is always a good thing.
Well, and I think it's pretty difficult to achieve, actually, when it comes to environmental impact and climate change. So any book that makes you feel a little bit more hopeful is probably worth holding on to. Eric, how about you? The one you could not stop talking about.
I'm going to go with Abundance by Ezra Klein and Derek Thompson. This coming off of last year's election, I think a lot of pundits and political analysts and friends were kind of very blamey. They weren't kind of offering things you could do. And I don't agree with everything in Abundance, but it's definitely one of the more here's a plan we can get behind. I want to hear all your other plans. I want to he wants to understand how we move forward, how we can get the majority of Americans to be more progressive, especially in a building sense. He said the Democratic Party has stopped being a party that could get things done. And I think that's true. I think there's a lot of things in the book that need to be talked about. And I talked about that with a bunch of my friends. And I think we enjoyed it as a catalyst to move us out of what we did wrong to how we can move forward.
It's interesting that both of the books you couldn't stop talking about gave you kind of something to feel hopeful or empowered about. I think that there's so much need for that in a world right now, that there's just so much to be worried about, so much lack, that maybe a book that makes you think, okay, all is not lost, is like the one you want to tell everybody about. Eric, did you have any thoughts about what the Wild Sea can be?
It's definitely a book for people who love the sea. It's lots of details. It wasn't my favorite. If there's too many like details and it's not like a textbook that I need to do for a class, I kind of like takes me a very long time to read it. But there were some hopeful parts of it. Definitely gave some ideas of what we could do to move forward, but wasn't my favorite out of this year's 12.
Yeah. And Maggie, how about you for abundance?
So I think abundance, both of you guys were out, so I ended up leading that discussion for abundance. And what I really liked about that is I had our icebreaker be, how do you define abundance? And so I thought that was really fun to get everybody's perspectives on what abundance means to them. Definitely not my favorite book we've read. I know that it is definitely a catalyst for conversation. I do think it falls short on a lot of the ideas that it promises in the first chapter or so.
So the one I couldn't shut up about, and I still reference it now. We read this toward the beginning of the year too, and I still think about it, I still talk about it, is Emotional Labor by Rose Hackman. And the general premise of emotional labor is that the work of managing our feelings and managing other people's feelings is labor. And it takes energy and it takes time. And it requires skills to execute on that labor. And that this labor in our society is unnamed and invisible and therefore undervalued. And it also disproportionately falls on the shoulders of women. And I related to it deeply. I loved how she explained it. And it's one of those things, this might be when a book is most powerful, when it describes something and puts language to something that is such a big part of your life and your work, and you've just never really thought about it. And now all of a sudden you have a title or a word or a phrase to describe something that has been, whether it's good, better, or indifferent, has been influential in your life. And for me, that's what emotional labor was. And even just just wrapping my head around the definition that I just shared, which is emotional labor is work. It is work that takes time, resources, and skills. It is not work that, generally speaking, is compensated or identified or even valued. And it came at a time when we were making big changes in my company. The company is 15 years old, and we've never had to do layoffs before, and we had to do layoffs. And it was a really difficult time for me and for really for the whole company, the leadership team, for everybody. And I was reading Emotional Labor at the time, and I was able to say to my leadership team, I recognize that these changes to our staff have come with a lot of work, talking to payroll, figuring out how we're going to restructure, figuring out how we're going to have these conversations. But they've also come with this incredible emotional labor, managing your emotions, managing the team's emotions, managing your own emotions. And even just being able to say that, a couple of people reached out to me afterwards and said, I'd not really thought about it, but I really appreciated you just acknowledging the emotional labor that's gone into this. And so I have shared it with so many people, but I also think it's materially changed how I manage, how I lead, and how I look at my own work. Did you guys have any thoughts on that one?
I enjoyed it. I think I was a little more familiar with those concepts than some of just from other reading that I've done. But I do think it's very helpful. I know I've recommended to other people at my job who are in more managing roles, leadership roles, as something they should potentially read, because it can be challenging for women in leadership, no matter what company you're at or what type of leadership position, because managing feelings is sometimes just expected when you're a leader and also a girl. So that can be tough.
Yep.
I think I suggested this book this year, and I think it's a very important topic. I've been in a lot of groups, like when I hanging out with friends or even in non-work capacity. I think men fall short of emotional labor and just planning in general. And they just take it as something that should be done by women in relationships or friend groups or relationships of all kinds. So it's a very needed topic, and I think more people should be aware of it. But yeah, very positive feelings towards the book. I think we should read more about it in the future.
Yeah. Well, I can't wait to see what award it wins for you. So the next category, the Do Something About It book, the one that didn't just make you think, but really compelled you to act, change a habit, start a conversation, whatever it might be. I can go first on this one. So for this, okay, this is Maggie and I might fight over this, but I had Atomic Habits by James Clear.
Not going to fight about it. I've made my feelings about it very clear in January.
So Atomic Habits by James Clear, one of the best-selling books of recent years. And this was the second time I've read it. I read it years ago and then I reread it because it was one of our book club members' choices for us to read this year, because we take some suggestions and submissions from all of our members. And I just think this book, for me, and having had conversations and read lots of articles and listened to podcasts about it, I do recognize that this book does not work for everybody. And I think particularly can be challenging for people who are neurodiverse. For me, this book really works very well and is really about how you form habits. One of my favorite quotes from this book is, "You will not rise to the level of your goals, you will fall to the level of your systems." And it really makes an argument that anything that you want to do, you need to build systems to help you take consistent action, or put another way, you need to develop good habits. And just the framing of the book, the introduction in the first chapter, were a really important mindset shift for me when I first read it. And then there are just little tips and tricks throughout the book that I use all the time. So one of them is, if you want to start a new habit, attach it to an existing habit. So I'm somebody who sort of wanders in and out of meditation, and sometimes I'm doing it and sometimes I'm not doing it. But when I'm doing it, it's always good for me. And so recently I was like, okay, I'm going to get back into a meditation habit. So I attached it to something in my day that I already do every day, which is, brushing my teeth. So when I brush my teeth, I start meditating, or I don't do them concurrently. I brush my teeth and then I meditate. And it works for me. And so this is I've recommended it to a lot of people, some of whom love it and others it leaves them completely cold. But for me, it is one that has compelled me to act, and I come back to time and time again. Any thoughts on Atomic Habits before you guys share your Do Something About It books?
Generally, I believe in the systems idea of building systems. It doesn't work all the time. There's definitely things in life that he hasn't dealt with and doesn't talk about in the book, like neurodiversity or any sort of obstacles that might come in the way besides of like get up and do it kind of thing. Yeah, there's definitely a lack of like emotional awareness in the book as well. But the overall idea of like having a system and doing it as small as possible, like you don't have to run a mile, you could just go walk 10 steps, is definitely a good idea. And I've heard people like iterating on his idea of having like, I'm having an awful day, this is the routine I'm going to do. And I'm having like the greatest day ever, and this is the routine I'm going to do. So you still feel like consistent. So you're like building into your system your like emotional capabilities for that day.
Yeah, I think that this book falls into the category of self-help. I think that's a fair thing to say. And one of the criticisms of self-help books that is incredibly valid is that they come from this insinuation that all you have to do to solve your problems and meet your dreams is change some sort of individual behavior. And it completely overlooks systemic barriers, privilege, things that are baked into our systems and structures that advantage one person over another. They tend to overlook neurodiversity, mental health. And I think that those criticisms are really, really valid. And at the same time, I think some of the tactics I've just found helpful on a personal level. All right. Maggie, your Do Something About It book.
So Mine was Hope Dies Last, which I know we just read in December. But the thing I really took away is it tells the stories of different change makers across the world in different periods of time and what they do to address climate change issues impacting their communities. It's very dense, it's very long. I would recommend probably reading it and not listening to it because there are a lot of people in this book and it's hard to keep them all straight and in place. But the reason why I picked it for the Do Something About It book is each section is about people who are doing something about it, and they're doing it in very unique ways that best suit their community and those community needs. And I just appreciated the depth of all of the different perspectives that the author goes through. I found that very inspiring and very cool because usually a book for climate change, we only get like a couple stories in very specific communities, and they're things we've like heard before, like, oh, they're building like a seawall or things like that. And these were all very unique ideas to address climate change, and I hadn't seen most of them before, so I thought that was really fun to read.
Yeah, it was. I completely agree with you. It was really compelling, really different, really refreshing and hopeful, and so dense. Like dense, like 3-week-old bread. Like just like you need to hack your way through this thing. So I, as I always do, listen to my books really rather than read them, because when I sit down to read, I fall asleep. And I can confirm it's a rough audio listen. I also would maybe recommend not trying to binge read this book.
Yes. The author is also a University of Arizona professor laureate, I think is what his. So it was very fun to get stories of things that have happened in Arizona for climate change. They're very relevant to our communities. So there was more information about our communities than I was expecting for what is an international book. So it's fun to see.
And Eric, what was your Do Something About It book?
I think this book was written for people like me. I work in the fintech banking industry, and I work in marketing. So in the book Moral Ambition, where he says we should stop having people who are highly educated trying to get us to click buttons, it's literally what I do. So I've been looking at a wider array of jobs, hopefully doing something in social justice. He does talk about like effective altruism and how he has a nuanced view of it, but it's also just inspiring and hopeful in like that you can make a difference. I think during the book club, we had a large discussion about, because he's very aggressive at first. And then in the last chapter, he's like, you don't have to work 120 hours a week to change the world. You should have a family and get the car you want. But in the first chapter, he's kind of like, you should save every kid and do everything you can. I guess I didn't read that too seriously. Of all the other books we've read, I think along the line of you can't kill yourself to save the world, because then there won't be any people left to save the world.
Maggie, any thoughts on Moral Ambition by Rutger Bregman?
This was one that I did not have the chance to read, but I was there for the discussion. And I would agree with Eric's takeaway. I think sometimes people who don't directly work in change-making roles sometimes feel a little stuck. They're like, I have a corporate job. Like, I might volunteer at the food bank a couple times a week, but I don't really know how else to create the change I want to see in my community. And I think it's helpful to have a book that speaks to that in a very approachable way.
Yeah, this was, I would say, in my reading and my memory, this was the most animated discussion we had, where people really had strong opinions about this book. And it was a large turnout book. Like, a lot of people came for the first time because of this book being our selection. And one of the criticisms that the discussion brought up, which I think is valid, is that the book insinuated, again, it didn't really exactly state it, but it sort of insinuated that the only way to change the world is to dedicate how you get paid to changing the world. And one of the discussion points that came up in the group is there's tons of ways to change the world. And you may make your money in something that's not directly associated with social justice, and also be able to dedicate your time, your resources, your energy, your passions to creating change in lots of other ways. And that doesn't mean you're like wasting your talent, which is pretty much word for word what he says in the book. And so it was a really great discussion about what it means to change the world, how you can do that, and does it quote unquote count if you are doing it on your spare time. All right, that leads us to the hardest read. So not necessarily because you didn't like it, but the book that just took a little bit more effort to read, and why. Maggie, what do you have for this one?
So I had Medicine River for this one, and this one was the hardest to read. It's a memoir. The author really talks about her family's experience with the Native American boarding schools that existed in our country and how that has directly impacted her, how she grew up, her mom, who did go to one of the Native American boarding schools. And I found this a very hard read because it is such a crystal clear view on the impacts of large systematic forces on individual relationships. I think we can all relate to family relationships and sometimes struggling trying to find your roots or connect with parents. And having such large outside forces like the Native American boarding system and just how negative it can be and how it impacts generations upon generations, and still does to this day. Impact is felt in communities all over, not just in the US, but like in Canada as well, that had similar systems. So yeah, that was the hardest one for me. I read it fairly quickly, but it was still, I had to sit with it for a while.
I had the same one. This is by Marionette Pember, and it was just beautifully written and really poignant. And the reason I found this one so hard to read is because the heaviness of it, and knowing just the generational trauma caused by very intentional, systemic persecution of a group of people, and the real lack of accountability for that, and any kind of making good of those harms, and just how that impacts people and families and communities. And I think what's really powerful about this book is she demonstrates so beautifully that these wrongs, this persecution, it does impact families and communities and individuals. And so there's this harm on these multiple levels that thread together. And those harms don't go away. They're baked into your DNA. They're baked into your family history. They're baked into your norms and what you think the world owes you or what you think the world can offer you. And that it was just so beautifully explained and articulated in the book, directly and indirectly. And because of that, I found that just very, very heavy to sit with, and would highly recommend it. Eric, what do you have for this one? The hardest read.
The hardest read I don't have the author, so if either of you know it, please help. Murder the Truth.
Yeah, that's David Enrick.
Thank you. This one, written by a journalist, I think it was very well written. Lots of unnecessary details too. You talked about, I think, was this the champagne one where you mentioned, and then they celebrated with champagne like 800 times.
Champagne was a main character in this one.
But that's not what made it difficult to read. There's a lot of interesting stories about how rich people and others in the world community are trying to upend freedom of the press. Peter Thiel got really upset because Gawker said something mean about him. So he decided that he was going to have some sort of PSYOP mission. He's going to hire lawyers that aren't related to him to destroy a magazine. And then other people, like mafia from different countries who are somehow related in business in America, are trying to take down the way we interpret our Constitution so that they can basically get away with doing and saying whatever they want, or on the same half, using it to get rid of people who say things negative about them that are factful. I think this was so hard to get through was because there was no what do I do against billionaires and Supreme Court justice and corruption? Everything seems stuck. Supreme Court justices are there until they leave or they die. Rich people will be rich and they'll want to do what they want to do. So there's no real takeaway for the reader besides that this is happening, you should be aware of it kind of thing. Awareness is good, but it kind of leaves you feeling a little down on the world.
Yeah, this was tough for that exact reason. Like, it was pretty dense, but there really was, it was like, let me tell you a story about how everything's gone horribly wrong and is only going to get worse. And there,
There's
you know, it's a
nothing you
very
can do
long
about it.
story. And there's nothing you can do about it. Yeah, but it does read, because I think it's written by a journalist, it does read like a story. So in that way, it's kind of a fluid read, if not an easy read. So another one that reads like a story, or at least I thought it did, is my answer for the next category, which is the most hopeful read. So which author helped you feel that actually change is possible, especially when the world feels so heavy? And I, for this, have We All Want to Change the World by Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, which is really an account, also a memoir, but a memoir that's not a full life memoir. It's a memoir specifically focused on the social change movements that Abdul-Jabbar has been involved in throughout his career and his life. And it's divided not chronologically, it's divided by movement. So the first chapter, I think, if I'm remembering this right, was on freedom of speech. And then there's a section about LGBTQ equality, there's a section about gender equality, there's a section about racial equality, and I think I'm definitely missing some, but it's sort of organized thematically. And within each chapter, he tells a story about the protest movements that have taken part, his involvement in each of them, and what change was able to be driven. And the big takeaway I took from this, and this was one of the ones where I loved the book, but I also loved the discussion we had about the book. And I just left feeling that social change movements do work. And when you're in the middle of it, it often feels like you're going backwards more than you're going forwards. And it's not clean, and it's not linear, and it's not easy. But when you zoom out, and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar zooms out and tells a story of all of these different areas of focus, all of which have seen incredible movement in his lifetime, you can really see, oh yeah, this does work. And people showing up over and over and over for something they care about does move the needle. And I really felt uplifted by this book. Maggie, how about you?
So I had the same one, We All Want to Change the World. And part of what drew me to it is sort of what you said, where it's organized by theme rather than chronologically, which I really appreciated, because you're looking at different movements individually and then looking at specific action items in them. I think it shows as more impactful than if you was just to have a timeline with like each date of when something happened. And then I think one of the other things is he ties it to his specific story as a basketball player and the causes he's been involved in. And I think that's what makes it very impactful, is he is relating it to his specific story, his experiences, while also having a very broad lens on different social justice movements.
Yeah, for sure. Eric, thoughts on this book, and what was yours?
I appreciate it a lot. I love these like sports heroes that like are doing the work. Like there's a lot, like I didn't know anything about Kareem Abdul-Jabbar outside of that he was really good at basketball and that he shows up on television shows sometimes. So it's really good to see that like he had a full life. He had like a mission outside of like his 9 to 5. The one I picked for most hopeful read is kind of the same persistence and human innovation throughout time, but less story and more math, because that's what I like. Factfulness by Hans Rosling. And I think his
that's right.
son and daughter-in-law helped after he died to get the book out. His message in the book, it's kind of based around like 10 ways to think about data and stories and how to like not blind yourself to like doomsday thinking and all these kind of things that we have like this idea in our head of like the death rate of children in the world. We still think that's a bad thing, or that many women are uneducated now because of inequality. But he's saying that in fact, these things are getting a lot better over time. and he shows ways to show that and how to think about it and how we can think in the future when we're trying to like get our message across about how these things aren't improving, and we shouldn't think of them in like months or years. You should look at a lot of things over decades, and there's truly magnificent work being done by humanity to make everyone more equal and have equal opportunities to be educated, have a good life.
All right, the last of our book awards, the book we wish everybody would read. Eric, you want to take us first?
Yeah. Like I alluded to before, this is emotional labor for me. I think it's, as far as I know, only like 2 academics. I am very early into the field of emotional labor are talking about this. So I think they need help spreading the word. So anyone I talk to, I'm like, here, read this book. It'll either make you feel seen or it'll like open your mind to like half the world you're missing of like how other people are living life than you're just kind of worrying about yourself all the time kind of feel. I don't say that to people, but I just give them book.
Well, I agree. I just love this book so much. This is definitely my favorite nonfiction read of the year. Maggie, what is the book you wish everybody would read?
So for me, I picked Demystifying Disability by Emily Ladau. I really enjoyed this book. I enjoyed it so much that I actually went and bought the physical copy of it. This book is really eye-opening in the sense of like, how do we want to build a more accessible and equitable world? And I think for many of us, when we are trying to enact positive social change, accessibility is not always something we consider, and it absolutely should be, because we can't build positive social change without including all of our communities, and that's going to include people who are disabled. So I really enjoyed this read. I thought it was a great conversation. I also think getting the physical copy is really fun because it is printed in an accessible way, from the font to the spacing to the different sections. And I think that was really eye-opening to be able to compare that to some of my other social change printed books who are printed in very, very different ways. So yeah, I thought it was great. This would be the one I would recommend.
I had Demystifying Disability as well for all of the reasons that you said. I also think it's a really fantastic introduction to some of the pillars and the cornerstones of disability and conversations around disability and access. Things like language, and whether you're explaining the difference between diagnosis language and identity language, talking about the politics of that, talking about the history. It is a really fantastic blend of explaining the history behind things like the American Disabilities Act, explaining the history around some language changes and some language that is considered problematic and how that's evolved. So there's this history component, there's a sort of practical manual component, and then it's very much told in a sort of storytelling format, weaving in the personal experiences of the author. And yeah, it's such an easy read. It's very short. I did find it to be kind of like a really great 101, and I want the 201. I want the 201 and the 301. I want that sort of like next level. But yeah, I think this was a really great book. And the first book we've read in our history on specifically disability access, and I think we'll be reading more because, as you said, Maggie, social justice is only social justice if everyone's included. And this is a community and a vantage point that is all too often left out.
Yeah, and the one thing I wanted to add is it is one of the few things that can strike anybody. We're not guaranteed to never become disabled. In fact, it's kind of the opposite. Probably at some point in our life, we maybe temporarily or permanently become part of this community. And so making sure we're building for everyone, I think, is very valuable. And it's just a great introduction. It is a really nice read, and it's not overwhelming the way some like practical guides can be on approaching challenging topics.
Yeah, I think that's right. The other thing I loved about the tone of this book is it's very much a calling in rather than a calling out. You know, it sort of introduces the reader to things that they might not have thought of before, or experiences that they might not have witnessed or had themselves. But it's very much in a calling in, I want to share these experiences and this viewpoint by way of expanding your horizons, rather than being sort of critical or judgmental. And I think that is a very difficult thing to achieve in writing, and that it was just, I thought it was flawlessly executed by the author. All right, so there's our superlatives, there's our categories. Stepping out a bit, I'm curious, Maggie and Eric, any honorable mentions for books that we haven't discussed, and or what themes stood out to you across the board?
I think we might have mentioned all of the books, but I think one of the biggest takeaways from all of our reading is there is hope, but it does require us to form our communities and go out there. I don't think hope is passive. I think hope requires being active in different forms, and I think a lot of our books really illustrated the history of that in many different ways, all the way from like social justice movements to the ocean. So I think that was sort of my big takeaway from all of our books this year.
Yeah, I love that. You're right. We did mention all 12, which wasn't on purpose. We naturally did that. So that's kind of cool. I completely agree with you, Maggie, that if I had to put a headline on what we read this year, it's that, yes, there are challenges, but yes, there is hope, and you get to choose, basically. And through lots of different lenses of different types of authors, different backgrounds, different types of book, like memoir versus a historical account versus more of a narrative form, and then lots of different sectors and vantage points. I just think also there was this kind of echoing of like, yes, things are difficult, but yes, there's something you can do about it. Eric, anything to add?
I think that's it. I think hope was there. There's a lot more history than I thought we would read this year. There's like, even with a book called Hope Dies Last, you don't expect to be learning like 3,000 years of history to figure out why marshlands aren't marshlands anymore and how they're coming back. But yeah, I like that sum up, that things are hard, but there's always hope. I think that sums up this year pretty well.
And any specific personal areas of growth that you guys took from reading these books?
I'd say that I've been a lot more active in my community would probably be something I've done. I've started volunteering a lot more, and also talking with my neighbors as well. I have phone numbers for multiple people who live in my building now, which I didn't before this year. So I think that's positive, especially because we can now text each other when things go wrong at our apartment complex, which is always nice.
How about you, Eric?
I think professionally, I've been more aware of bias in AI, and I'm continuing to learn. There's a lot of other books we didn't choose because they're like 400 or 500 pages written by academics, so we didn't think we'd get a large turnout for those. But I'm going to continue down that path, figure out what kind of impact I'm having in the world and how I can help keep humans involved in all the processes for work. And if our tech lords are right and work will stop in the next couple of years, how we can figure out how to make that work for everyone and not just the 12 of them who are CEOs of billion-dollar, trillion-dollar corporations. So that's where I've been trying to grow into and find answers to.
It's a pretty lofty goal. I found myself at the end of a lot of our book clubs wanting to kind of give a little speech about how grateful I am for every single person who read a book and spent a couple of hours of their month showing up and talking with other people about what this book meant and the implications of it for changing our world. And I did actually sort of give in and give that speech a couple of times at the end of our book clubs. And I don't remember having that urge in the past. And this year, 4, 5, 6 times, I just felt compelled at the end to express this incredible gratitude. And I think that the books, but more importantly, the conversations that they sparked, really showed me how much people care about the future of our world, and they want to learn about it, and they want to connect with other people that care about it, and they want to change their actions and influence the actions of other people. And that's a really cool thing. And if I took one thing away from this year, it was that. And that's big. That is not a small thing. So last question, what is one book or topic you're both absolutely itching to read about in the new year? Maggie?
I would say I would love for our book club to read a book about trans rights. I think trans people are some of our most marginalized community members, and I would love for us to read a book. Could be a memoir, could be a history, could be a specific like legal case angle. I know we haven't read one of those yet. I don't think we have, and I would love for us to have a book regarding that. I think it would be very valuable for our book club members.
Eric, how about you? What are you burning to read?
I've heard a lot of people mention, and I think starting to grow on me about political and social advocacy and helping people in that and how to view systemic change in a more like scientific way. I know those words don't make you happy. The science and maths, yeah. So one of them I have to check, but somebody should do something about that. It's written by like 3 MIT professors, and it's supposed to be like a scientific framework for systemic change and social justice. That sounds interesting. But there's also a great book coming out in February called The Changemaker's Toolkit: How to Power Social Change in a World That Needs Hope by Catherine Alonso. Should be a great read.
Totally gonna look like I put you up to that, but yes, the book comes
She
out
did
February 26th, February 26th, and I am very excited about it. And yeah, it certainly continues the theme that there's something to be hopeful about. A topic when we were brainstorming in book club about what we should read, a topic that I think you mentioned, Maggie, was reading about the abortion, the history of abortion and politics of abortion, and that's something we have not read on that topic, so it's something I'd love to read because I think that it is very, very relevant today and impacts everybody, no matter what gender they are. Well, a couple of books that we do have coming up in the new year are The Profiteers by Christopher Marquise, and that's our January book club. We're meeting Monday, January 12th, so pretty soon after this episode drops, but if you happen to hear this, I will tell you, it's a no-shame book club. So if anybody comes and you haven't read it or you haven't read all of it, it does not matter at all. We always have a fantastic conversation, and again, you can join us in the Phoenix location of Changing Hands at 6:30 on the second Monday of every month. Or we also do have a Zoom link that you can join by from anybody listening outside of Phoenix. And to get the Zoom link, you would need to visit my website, catherinealonso.com, and you can RSVP. And then our February book is Don't Talk About Politics by Sarah Stein Lebrano. And that was selected by one of our book club members, Jeff, and we'll be reading that Monday, February 9th. So thank you guys so much for another fantastic year of reading and also just spending some time with me today, geeking out on what we read and what we learned. I always love doing it. And I do want to give a shout out right here for our book club regulars who show up every single month and suggest books, and we grab dinner afterwards, and we just always have a fantastic conversation about whatever topic has been on the table that month and how we as individuals can make an impact. And it always makes me feel a little better. And so a big shout out to everybody who joins. Maggie, Eric, thank you so much.